So the essence of a Roth IRA conversion is you are taking a traditional IRA. And by the way, I always talk about Roth IRA conversions. You can also have a Roth 401k conversion. That is, if money is in your 401k plan at work, assuming that the plan at work allows for it, you can go from a traditional 401k to a Roth 401k. Or I'm talking about a traditional 403b to a Roth 403b. And all that is conceptually very similar from going from a traditional IRA to a Roth, a tax-free Roth IRA. So how do you go from the taxable environment to the tax-free environment? Well, you have to add the amount of Roth IRA conversion that you are making. And let's assume that you have no basis. So forget the exceptions that the question was about and that I'm going to cover soon. You're going to have to pay income taxes. You're going to have to add that income to your existing income and pay taxes on the new amount. So to just use a simple example, let's say your income before the Roth IRA conversion is $100,000, and you make $100,000 of a Roth IRA conversion. Now you're going to have to pay income taxes on $200,000. So you're adding to your income, and people say, well, what rate? Well, whatever rate that additional income throws you into, and it might be at the 22% bracket or the 24% bracket or even a higher bracket. All right, so then you're going to have to pay taxes on that additional income. And then what you get in return for paying taxes on that additional income from the Roth IRA conversion is you get income tax-free Roth IRA that will grow income tax-free for the rest of your life, the rest of your spouse's life, and even 10 years beyond your spouse's life. And if your beneficiary qualifies for one of the exceptions, to some extent over the life of your beneficiary. There is no required minimum distribution for Roth IRA owners. There is no required minimum distributions if you leave your Roth IRA to your spouse. That is, your spouse will not have any minimum required distributions. Your heirs will, but again, under the Secure Act, they can, they'll have to take that inherited Roth and withdraw it within 10 years after you're gone. But the good news is that withdrawal will be income tax free. So that will be a very good thing. All right, now here comes the secret. And I know some of you are groaning, oh no, I've been listening to Jim for 20 years, and for 20 years, every time he talks about the Roth IRA conversion, he tells us the secret. I'm sick of it, and I get it. But I would have two responses. One, many people haven't heard it. And two, even if you've heard it, it can never hurt to hear this one more time, because it is so critical to understand the concept of Roth IRAs and Roth IRA conversions, and for that matter, even understanding the nature of IRAs and retirement plans. So the secret is to understand the best measuring tool to measure wealth. And usually the way we think about this is, okay, whoever has the most money wins. So let's say, for discussion's sake, I have $1 million in my IRA. My total dollars is $1 million. And let's say that you have $900,000, but it's not in an IRA. It's a plain old brokerage account on which you have already paid income taxes. So I have more money than you, right? I have $1 million, you only have $900,000. But let's say that we both want to go out and buy something. I'm going to have to cash in my IRA. I'm going to have to pay a couple $100,000 in taxes. And then with the money that I have left, instead of being able to go out and buy goods and services that are worth $1 million, I'm going to maybe have to limit my consumption to, let's say, $750,000, because that is how much money I will have left after I cash in the IRA, because I had to pay taxes. So even though I had $1 million of total dollars measured in terms of purchasing power, that is how much goods and services can you buy with the money that you have, I would have $750,000. All right. You, on the other hand, have $900,000 after taxes. So you could go out tomorrow and buy $900,000 of goods and services. So you have a lot more purchasing power than I do. So what I would like to do is to ask you to think in terms of a new paradigm and use not total dollars as the measure of what your wealth is, but purchasing power. So we're going to measure wealth in purchasing power. All right. So let's go to a new example. Let's assume that we each have $100,000 of a traditional IRA. All right. And we each have $24,000 outside the IRA. So $100,000 in a traditional plain old IRA, $24,000 outside the IRA. So we have a combined total of $124,000. All right. How much money do we have in terms of purchasing power? Well, if we cash in our IRA of $100,000, we have to add that $100,000 to our existing income. Let's assume, for discussion's sake, that that money will be taxed at 24%. So the tax on that money would be $24,000. In this example, I conveniently have the $24,000 to pay the taxes on that IRA distribution, which is what I would have to do if I wanted to buy goods and services now. So measured in purchasing power, we each have $100,000. All right, everybody with me so far? $100,000 IRA, $24,000 outside the IRA, $124,000 total, but purchasing power of $100,000. All right, and let's say that I say, I am happy with my $100,000 in my IRA and my $24,000 outside my IRA. So I'm not going to cash them in. I'm just going to keep investing them. And then you say, oh no, I want to make a $100,000 Roth IRA conversion. So I do nothing, and you or your financial advisor or somebody completes the paperwork for a $100,000 Roth IRA conversion of your existing IRA of $100,000. And let's just say the money is at Schwab or wherever it is. And Schwab sends you a 1099. And it says, please add $100,000 to my existing income. And let's say that that additional income is taxed to 24%. All right. So you have to write a check to the IRS for $24,000. And you do that. But remember, when we started this process, we each had $24,000 outside the IRA. So you say, okay, here's my $24,000 check. I'm going to give it to the IRS. And what I have left is $100,000. All right, now, so you're sitting there with $100,000 total in a Roth IRA. I'm sitting there with $100,000 of a traditional IRA, but I have the $24,000 outside of the IRA. Now, we both have $100,000 of purchasing power, because if I want to go out and buy goods and services, I have to cash in my $100,000 IRA, which is going to trigger a $24,000 tax. I write a check to the IRS for $24,000. I now have $100,000 of purchasing power. You have a $100,000 Roth IRA. If you want to go out and buy goods and services, you just cash it in, and there is no income taxes. So we each have $100,000. Now, think about this for a second. This isn't on, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, etc. This is on minute one, day one. We are tied if our measurement is purchasing power. This is so important, and so many people get this wrong. And if you look at the calculators on the web, They measure in total dollars. And these, quote, so-called Roth IRA experts, many of them measure in total dollars. If you measure in total dollars, you're going to get a really distorted reality of how much money and when you should convert. Because if you're measuring in total dollars, here's basically the result that you are likely to find. Roth IRA conversions are good for younger IRA owners because they have many years of tax-free growth to overcome the taxes that they had to pay to do a Roth conversion. But Roth IRA conversions aren't good for older taxpayers who have to, who don't have as many years to make up for the taxes that they had to pay to get to a Roth IRA conversion. So the conclusion is Roth IRA conversions are good for young people, but not so good for older IRA owners. And that is true if you're measuring in total dollars. But if you're measuring in purchasing power, you break even on day one, even if you're 90 years old, even if you're 100 years old, even if you're one day away from death, you're going to break even on day one by making a Roth IRA conversion, assuming that you are staying in your same income tax bracket. And that's a critical concept that so many advisors, so many so-called experts, and frankly, most consumers get or don't get. And I am in front of thousands and thousands of CPAs. I do talks for CPAs. I just did one that I think is going to end up going to well over 1,000 CPAs, and I'm doing another one shortly. I'm always in front of estate attorneys. I just did one, I think, for about 500 financial advisors. Let me tell you who kind of gets this and who kind of doesn't get it. The people who don't get it the most are the attorneys. Sometimes they're hopeless. My Westinghouse engineers get this concept much better than the attorneys. Sometimes when you talk to attorneys, you have to kind of dumb it down a little bit. But anyway, the next group that gets it the second best typically are the financial advisors. And the group that kind of gets this concept the best are the CPAs, and this concept of purchasing power is not as foreign to them. And then in terms of the general IRA public, there is perhaps it's hard to say which group is going to get it the best. The engineers, the quantitative types probably get this better. But one of the reasons I don't mind doing this example again and again and again is because it is so critical. So even if we do break even on day one, nobody wants to write a big check to the IRS to break even. They want to do better. So let's even forget about income tax increases. Let's even forget about tax rate increases either because of Congress or because your minimum required distribution is going to push you into a higher bracket, or one of the two of you married folks is going to die and the survivor is going to have to file a single increasing. Let's forget all that stuff. And if we do projections for the IRA owner and the spouse of the IRA owner, you could find that the difference over time, it doesn't look all that big in this graph, but it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that is you and your spouse are better off over time if you do this series of Roth IRA conversions, even if you don't start until you're age 65. And then let's take that same, and by the way, I have all the assumptions, but I'm not going to go through them because everybody is going to fall asleep and cry that they are bored. So let's say you do this Roth IRA conversion or a series of Roth IRA conversions, and that you live 20 years after you do this series of Roth IRA conversions, and then you die and you leave it to, let's say, for example, your kids, which is the most likely thing. Let's take a look at your kids and let's compare your kids if you do this series of Roth IRA conversions using these assumptions, and how your kids are doing if you don't do this series of Roth IRA conversions. And it shows with some reasonable assumptions that your kids are going to have a couple $1 million if you do the conversions, and they will eventually run out of money if you don't do the conversions. Again, I have some more assumptions, which I am going to skip over. So this is some pretty big stuff. And finally, you might say, hey, Jim, you're asking me to write a check to the IRS before I am required to do this. This doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And if I'm wrong, and I will grant you, if I'm wrong about this, you could be worse off because you're writing a check to the IRS. Well, I had mentioned that my business had suffered a fire in 1998, and I converted all of my my traditional IRA and 401k to a Roth IRA conversion, and that I did this with my wife with a spreadsheet, and that our family will be $1 million better off. And that was pretty cool revelation. But I had been working on Roth even before that. Well, if you can't tell by now, I am a proselytizer. No, I'm not a religious proselytizer. I am a Roth IRA proselytizer, and more appropriately, I am a wealth maximize proselytizer. So I had to prove it to the world. I had to tell the world how wonderful Roth IRA conversions were. So and how do you do that? Let's say you're a doctor and you have this new method of treating cancer, and it's working really well, and you want to tell the world about it, or you authored a new study. So what you would do is you would do this study, you would write it up, you would submit it to the New England Journal of Medicine or some other peer-reviewed journal. That is, you have other experts in your field, and let's just say for discussion's sake, it is about cancer. So you would have this peer review group of oncologists reading and nitpicking not only the article itself, but then they're going to attack the study, and they're going to really turn this thing upside down. And if they think after doing all that you are on course, then the New England Journal of Medicine could potentially accept your article for publication, and the article was published, and that is called peer review, because your peers, that is the other oncologists, have gone through this, nitpicking, looking at the study, looking at the wording in the article, et cetera, that it has met their blessing. And instead of just somebody posting something on the internet, you can say, well, I have a peer-reviewed article on the best way to treat a particular cancer. Well, we have the same thing in the CPA world. And the journal is called the Tax Advisor, which goes to, at least the last time I looked, it goes to 60,000 CPAs who are members of the tax division of the American Institute of CPAs. Anyway, I was very excited about this Roth IRA conversion idea. I wrote the article. I did all the spreadsheets. And again, back then, they didn't have all the wonderful software they had today. So we did it on a plain Excel spreadsheet. And by the way, when you do these kind of articles, you actually have to submit not only the article, but you have to submit the spreadsheets. Anyway, we had all these nitpicking CPAs trying to tear apart my article. Anyway, they loved the article, and it was published in 1998. It won Article of the Year, and it was the basis of that article that included the concept of purchasing power that was the basis for all the Roth IRA conversion work that I have done. I became very much in demand. I was getting $10,000 a day as a speaker. I spoke all over the country. I wrote 3 editions of Retire Secure. I wrote a dedicated Roth IRA conversion book. And by the way, I have all kinds of testimonials from Charles Schwab and Larry King and all the IRA experts, Ed Slott, Bob Keebler, and I won't say all of them, but I really, great testimonials from many of them. I was then featured in Forbes magazine, which was very cool. I did an article for Forbes.com where I'm a columnist, had 175,000 hits in the first 2 days. And I had a radio show, by the way, where we had, again, the top IRA experts. We also had Jack Bogle on the phone on the radio show twice, which was very cool. But all the IRA experts were Roth IRA experts or became Roth IRA experts, and they all were Roth IRA conversion advocates of some amount of money at some point in most IRA owners' lives. We started running the numbers, which we developed a methodology of how can we do this. We kept improving the process. New software came down, which we incorporated, which made it even better. And I would say that what we call running the numbers or determining the ideal amount of Roth IRA conversions, it's part art, part science. And we have been doing this for our clients for really 20 years now. It is part of our what we call our master plan of, by the way, which Roth IRA conversions are only one component. We also look at gifting and estate planning and how much money you can spend and how to educate your grandkids and all that kind of stuff. And at the level of today's software, all of these calculations, you would think today you just go, you put in a bunch of variables and you hit optimize and out it comes. It's nothing like that. It's more like the math concept of interpolation. Try this, try that, et cetera, et cetera. And the art is deciding what numbers we should plan. And sometimes people say, hey, Jim, what are some of the tools? Well, I'm an open book. Transparency, that is the new currency today. Just be authentic. So, I don't dye my hair. I don't, this is my real hair, et cetera, et cetera. Everything I'm telling you is, it's the best information I know. And I know that we do have financial advisors and CPAs on this call. And again, I'm in front of thousands and thousands of CPAs, financial planners, and estate attorneys. Well, we use the Brent Mark Roth IRA and Pension Analyzer, which I think is wonderful. We use Bob Keebler came up with some pretty cool software that's really good on tax brackets, and we use that. Believe it or not, we actually use plain old 1040 software. Now, we use a software called ProSystem FX, but really, ProSystem FX is kind of like TurboTax on steroids. So it is for CPAs who are doing hundreds and hundreds of tax returns. We've actually been using that same software, by the way, since I was using this. I hate to, now I want to date myself. I was using this software in 1978. Back then it was Computax. Back then we actually used to fill out manually these big input sheets. Now it's all, of course, done on PCs. But and we also, Steve Coleman, who is he's the serious Roth IRA guru in our office. He has actually developed his own spreadsheet application, which, by the way, we are constantly adding to. So, for example, I mentioned the STIM 3. He has a new section on, and by the way, none of the software has caught up to that. He has a new section on the impact of STIM 3 on Roth IRA conversions. And we're not going to get into it because it doesn't apply to that many people. But if you qualify for the child care credits, we now have a new section on our Roth IRA conversion Excel spreadsheet for that. So those are some of the tools that we use for the Roth IRA conversion, which is part of our master plan that does consider everything.